Hey everybody, this is Jamie, and today I'm coming to you to talk about building sex-positive community. Instead of talking to the experts like I usually do, I'm gonna tell you some of the lessons that I have learned as somebody who has run a chapter of Sex-Positive World, and what has come to learn from other leaders and people in these spaces now with Sex-Positive World as the executive director who puts on lots of online events and creates spaces where people can come together. In Sex-Positive World, we get a lot of people who come to us and say, I would like to start a chapter in my city, but how do I get started? So here's kind of my advice and what it takes to actually get started in creating your own local community that is sex positive and how it gets together. Why do this? This is one of the most important questions that you need to ask yourself, because I would say that there are kind of two reasons that people tend to do this. And the first one is going to set you up for a lot of messy problems. And the first reason would be for personal gratification. And we see this happen when folks are looking for sexual partners, when they're looking for polyamorous people to date, usually for something a bit more casual. And the idea of going into the space of creating community within sex positive for personal gain is just something that tends to get really messy in the end. So make sure that you're really able to say for yourself what your reasons are. So for me, I would say that my reason for joining Sex Positive and for being part of this community is for exactly that. We're building community. That is to say, a group of people who are like-minded on these topics. So if you are somebody who's really into kink, if none of your friends are into kink, it can be very isolating, especially if it's an important expression of your sexuality or your libido. Same deal if you are part of the LGBT community. You want to find people who are in a similar community. Now, a lot of those spaces can end up being very educational, or they can be very therapeutic in nature and tend to forget the social and fun side of things. And that's where Sex Positive fits in really nicely. Where you have this opportunity to have discussions around taboo topics, especially in gender expression, or when it comes to your sexuality and aging, body positivity, relationship styles. The list can go on and on and on, because sex positivity, of course, is this big umbrella concept, is what we call it, that includes lots of other different identities. So when I'm looking at my own self, I identify with a few identities and not every identity under the sex positive umbrella. For example, I identify as somebody who is into rope bondage, but I'm not into every single aspect of BDSM. I also consider myself polyamorous, and that opens up all kinds of relationship discussions and book groups and folks that are into that lifestyle. I have experimented with swinger lifestyle, although I've discovered it's not necessarily for me today, and that means that I have sort of a niche down idea of what communities I want to be interacting with. Not for the sake of finding love and fulfillment in relationship, maybe fulfillment, but not for the idea of finding a relationship or romantic partner. This is really about having a group of friends or a community that is similarly minded. So once you've nailed down why you're doing this, the next thing that you want to do is figure out how you're going to do this. Now, a lot of local chapters, especially in the United States, end up starting their groups on Meetup, which is a really great app that makes it so you can have a private group, you can have questions that let you know and filter who's coming in, that keeps your guests confidential, and that seems to be a tool that works really well. Of course, not everybody uses Meetup, or maybe your group's really small. Private Facebook groups work well. If you are looking at the kink side of this, there's always FetLife, and this is something you can definitely go deeper on. But where I'd suggest really starting is with your friends, because you'd be surprised how many friends that you have that would be into these sex positive things with you. So talking about, like, I want to get people together to have a cuddle party because I think it'd be really cool to be in that platonic space with people and experiment with consent. You might be surprised how many of your friends would say yes to something like that. Or maybe you're thinking about a local nudist resort or a local nudist watering hole. Those are all really cool places to go. But a really great way to get started that I think is much more accessible is just to arrange socials for people. Because when you create something that's sex positive and social, people can walk in with a lot of confidence that it's not going to be difficult, it's not going to be challenging, they're not going to be thinking about having to take their clothes off, it's not dating focused, and it lets people meet those who have similar interests. So you may end up meeting somebody there who's also into rope bondage and end up having more resources to share with each other. So when you're about ready to move past socials because you've got a good group of people together, and I mean, make a few socials, get people just at restaurants that can be very COVID friendly to be at a park, just have a discussion group, that sort of thing. And you don't have to be an expert to make it happen. Really pulling people together is the magic of this. It is important, however, to start building community standards. Now within Sex Positive, we use community standards that we call the 3 C's. I oftentimes tack on a 4th one to this, and I'll get into that in a sec. The reason that we have these community standards is because we need to all be on the same page about what is acceptable and what is not within this community. This makes it so that your spaces can stay safe, sane, and consensual. Now what do I mean by that? Let's start with things like confidentiality. Because we live in a culture that tends to be very much sex negative, in that if you're doing anything sexual, it must also be deviant. So not everybody wants it shared that they were at a sex positive event or even around people who might be associated with those ideas. So everyone needs to have in their head the idea that you don't share who was there with just anybody. This is members only, it's private, keep it to yourself. We also say that if you run out to somebody when you're out in public, that you should just ignore them, basically, which might kind of go against usual social standards, but the reality is you don't know who other people are with, what they're comfortable with other people knowing, and you might force them to lie or out themselves with the people that they're with. Confidentiality rules can go a long way to make space for professionals and parents to feel like they are also welcome in your sex positive space. Now after confidentiality, it's good to go over care. That is the idea that you are not here to take care of other people. Self-care comes first. So if you're in a space where there is some degree of interaction or uncomfortable topics in the room, say you got to go to an event where there's somebody speaking on a topic that might be a little spicy, you want people to remember to take care of themselves. If you're feeling nervous or hungry or need to leave the room, that priority needs to come first. There's not this social structure, no one's paying attention, trying to figure out what's going on with you, that you are able to actually take care of yourself first. We don't really make spaces like that. I think it's gotten better with time, but the reality is taking care of other people is where most of us are hardwired to go first. So by reminding people not to do that and to instead take care of themselves, it can make a huge difference in getting people to actually move from a place of consent. So consent. Consent, of course, this channel and my whole brand is named after consent. So what is it? Consent being yes means yes, no means no, and maybe means no. We live in a culture where people tend to want to argue with somebody when they say no. We want to figure out what was wrong, we internalize it, and we want to turn that no into a yes, because our culture kind of demands that. This comes up in the show all the time, and I'm happy to go into more detail, but I think y'all know what I'm talking about. So when you're in a space where when someone says no to you, and you are not taking it personally, we always practice in Sex Positive, saying thank you for taking care of yourself when someone says no to you. This sets a precedent that both the person can take care of themselves, that they're empowered to hold their boundaries, and that it is not their fault if they say no, because a lot of times we feel the need to tell a story or apologize, and this really empowers people to be in their own sovereignty. The amazing thing about people being in their own sovereignty is that they feel really good because we're really showing up for each other and not having to cage and hold back. And we're also not pushing ourselves on other people, forcing them to do that. The last piece of this that I tend to throw out, and this one's an advanced skill, is on communication. The idea being that we are humans, we do not have the same experience, and sometimes we say things that offend each other. So if people are given some kind of a decorum or standard to follow, then they're less likely to escalate those differences. In sex positive culture, we tend to use the phrase, "you've got spinach in your teeth," to express when someone has said something that is offensive or hurtful or outdated, because of course when someone tells you you have spinach in your teeth, the reaction is not to be defensive, the reaction is to be thankful and curious. Thank you, I didn't know I had spinach in my teeth. Could you tell me where it is so I can get rid of it? This tends to create this culture where people are able to grow and learn with each other. And if you start your events and your culture with these ideas in mind, you've set yourself up for success for when you want to go to a place where there's more touching involved and you personally don't want to police people so much. This should give you the bones to start your own consent-driven community. So was this helpful for you? Are there other places that you would go to start this kind of community? Do you know a better way to attract new members? Where would you go to market this kind of thing? And what kind of communities would you build using this infrastructure? Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. Next time, I'm going to be going over a lot of the structure that's involved in creating touch events. I hope that's helpful as well. If you got value out of this, please like and subscribe and share. It does make a huge difference in growing this channel, which is my goal right now, just trying to get up to 500 subscribers. I'm in a challenge, and it would just make all the difference in the world if you subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. Until next time, love you more.